I started collecting glass actually in the mid-1960s. A box of glass plate negatives was given to me by a neighbor of my parents, knowing that I was interested in photography. Thought that I should have them. I thought they were fascinating, but had no idea what I was going to do with them, and did not really, I guess, appreciate as much as I do now what they were. But I was about to leave Dover and head to the West Coast. So the box of negatives stayed with my parents. And I went off to California and Photography Brooks Institute in Santa Barbara, and stayed in California and did commercial and fashion photography for a number of years. In the 70s, after getting married and coming back to Dover, that box of negatives showed up again. So at the same time as I'm setting up my photography business, I'm thinking about the photographers that used to be in Dover, and Andy Rivers was one of the last. But when he decided to retire, I bought out all of his negatives that he had done over the years. Having all these negatives sparked my curiosity as what happened to some of the others. And it just kept going. I mean, I own at least over a dozen local area photographers. I have their works. And then a lot of miscellaneous stuff, Massachusetts, all over the country actually, but all up the coast of Maine. Right now there's probably over 100,000 glass plate negatives in the collection. I was one of the founding members of the Photographic Historical Society of New England when I came back here in the 70s. Glass negatives had been replaced long ago by acetate negatives, and glass is a piece of glass with an emulsion on it, very fragile, required a lot of care. But in the 1970s, there was no such thing as digital and scanners. The only way that you could reproduce an image was from the darkroom. You had to go in a darkroom to make a print. So when I built my darkroom, I built the darkroom around the fact that I'm going to be dealing with glass negatives. And I was able to find a 100-year-old Elwood 8x10 glass plate enlarger, which I restored, modified the cold head, the light head, and started printing right off the glass plate, which was the only way you could reproduce. Now, all these years, many historical societies had negatives sitting in their closets, had no idea what they had because there was absolutely no way to reproduce the plates. In the 80s, we started to become more aware of conservation, proper storage. And when I was acquiring a lot of these negatives, they were still in the photographer's original envelopes, which was wonderful because most of them had been identified and dated, and then some of the photographers even put down the f-stop they used on their camera and overcast day. I mean, great information. But these negatives are loaded with acid, especially at the seam. And if they touch the emulsion, they eventually embed an impression into the emulsion and even can start to deteriorate the emulsion. So now we realize that these negatives have to come out of the boxes and have to come out of the envelopes. So now I have this problem of we have to start buying archival material. And in order to properly store and secure the plate, they make a 4-way wrap, which is an archival material that you wrap the plate all 4 sides, and then I went a step further and inserted it into an archival envelope. Then, as the collection grows, like I said, other photographers, other collectors during the same period had no interest in glass. They wanted daguerreotypes, tin types, because the glass required a darkroom, and most of these collectors are not photographers or didn't have a darkroom. So they had no use. So a lot of these glass plates were going to the junk man or to landfills, or many left abandoned up in the barn or the attic of photographer's home. The collection just grew and grew and grew that it covers just about almost any subject matter you could think of. Most people think that because there's so much exposure related to Dover in books that I've published over the years and stuff, people think that my collection is Dover. And Dover is a large portion of it, but it is not the entire collection. I mean, I have Rochester, I have 2 photographers out of Rochester and hundreds of images of Rochester, Farmington, Milton images, Portsmouth, Isles of Shoals, Thelia Thaxter's cottage. It just goes on and on, up the whole coast of Maine. There's an image here on the exhibit of a Gunquit, of the fishing shacks before Gunquit became an art colony, a very early rare photo. Glass plate images all the way up into the mid sections of Bangor, showing the wood choppers and school kids posed in front of the schoolhouse and stuff in their bare feet. One picture that's on display here at the gallery is a picture of the Nubble when it was the black light, and most people have no idea what that means, but the lighthouse was painted black. And most people don't know that because it was painted over, and they realized when they did the renovation a few years ago when it was scraping paint, they actually found some of the black paint. You'll also see in early photos of the Nubble that there are scenes with 2 windows up in the top, and you'll see scenes where there's only 1 window. And then when they restored again, they put the 2 windows back. So these photos kind of show the evolution, the changing. And that's only one item that we see every day and take for granted, but don't really appreciate the history of what it went through. This new book that's just released this week is 128 pages with over 325 photographs. In addition to the photos, we have these wonderful invoices from the 1800s, trade cards. I have a couple of fire badges. The first book started with the Opera House. This starts with the first City Hall where Abe Lincoln, not as president, but as a young politician, came to New Hampshire to visit his son over at Phillips Academy in Exeter, was invited to Dover, came to Dover, stayed overnight in Dover at what we now call the Lincoln Building, the Corporation House on Locust Street. And down in the first City Hall in Franklin Square, he spoke for over 2 hours to over 1,500 people in that auditorium. 1866, the building burns. So that building, showing the building and the fire and Mr. Lincoln that's the start of the book. The second one is, so when you open the book, you've got the first City Hall on the left, and on the right would be the second City Hall. And that was built a little bigger with a clock tower and city marshal, and unfortunately that building burned. So that's how it starts, and this time we feature the I.B. Williams Belt Factory and Claristat, the #1 mill. I indicate the fire in 1907, but I show how Spalding Fiber was in there and Claristat manufacturing works its way. This book includes the landing, shows the waterfront, the Piscataqua, the gondola coming into Dover in 2016, first time a gondola returned to Dover. Works its way up into Franklin Square, and this time, instead of showing the Morrill Block in the first book, this shows the other side of the street, and it shows the Ramble Inn and the fish shanty that so many people remember, and Robinson's Bottling Company that bottled sodas. Goes around the corner, and there is the Broadway Baptist Church that was moved across the street so they could build the fire station in 1899. So there's a picture of the church, a picture of Joseph Abbott's gold fire chief's badge, and a picture of ladder #1, the horse-drawn ladder in front of the new fire station. But the next is that church across the street became the Clement Theater, and it was a silent era movie theater. You paid 10 cents to climb the stairs, and you sat in church pews, and the projectionist would hand crank an old Powers projector, which I have in my collection, and they would watch the film. So there's a picture showing the Clement Theater, but then it became the Broadway Theater in the 1930s, and in 1945 it burned. And that entire building was demolished. That was wood structure, and they added a brick addition, which is there today, became white, or eventually became the Lloyd Bridgham opened the Uptown Theater, and then for over 40 years was White House Opticians, and that is shown in the book so you can see the brick addition. But then right across the street, which is now a vacant lot, was the Bradley Hotel, which is a very famous hotel. A lot of the people that performed at the Opera House stayed at the Bradley Hotel, and there's a picture of the hotel with an original invoice underneath the picture. But then it goes out Broadway, and D.F. Richard in the old days when Danny Richard started the business, and it's got goes over to Salmon Falls Stoneware, goes up to Portland Avenue. It shows the Guppy House, the Guppy Farm, that was left to the city and used by the agricultural students for a while until it burned, and now it's Dustin's Market and Sweet Meadows Flowers. And then it features Garrison Hill, and it shows all the towers. It shows the original Haley's Tower, It's got a picture, a rare picture. It mentions the horse railway, and this photograph is not actually the horse railway, it's actually the horse-drawn carriage that was before the horse railway. So it's a pretty rare photo, but it does show, I think they call it an omnibus or something, but it does show, but it mentions the horse railway that used to take people from Sawyer's up to Haley's Tower. And then it shows the original Sawyer Memorial, Joseph Sawyer Memorial Tower, which Annie Sawyer left money to have built out of metal so it wouldn't burn. And then it shows the demolition of what got dubbed the Garrison Hill Tower, and then the building and the dedication of the new tower. And then it works its way down Central Avenue, picking up businesses that were not in the first book, and winds its way, includes the Bellamy Grist Mill, a Pierce, that owned the Bellamy bone mill and the grist mill, but then it shows Bellamy Park when it was a swimming pool with lifeguards. Shows some pictures of the park today, and the Drake's motor sale, which is now Sullivan Tire down by Sawyer's, and then works its way down Dover Point, shows Middlebrook Farm. And Middlebrook Farm was Charles Sawyer, Governor Sawyer, when he sold his interest in Sawyer Mills in 1899. He moved into his wife's family's home of the farm, Middlebrook Farm, and he turned it into one of the biggest milking farms in the state. And it kind of ends with a picture of the apple orchard, a big, huge apple orchard. Used to furnish apples, and it's a picture of all the guys with the barrels and the wagon and the apples. And the photo underneath it is one of the original houses, the carport one-story houses we now know as Applevale. And then it goes, that Middlebrook Farm became a rest home. And then it shows the original Roberts Farm, which was the oldest at the time, and then it goes over to Tuttle's, shows the original Tuttle house and what it looks like today, and then the old red barn with Hugh Tuttle, and today is Tendercrop. And then it ends at Dover Point with the bridges, and it shows the original railroad bridge that came across, the construction of what they call Little Bay Bridge that became the General Sullivan Bridge, and it ends with a picture of the toll takers. You paid toll until the bridge was paid. Picture of the toll takers, and underneath a color photo of what the bridge looks like today and what is the fate of the bridge. Will it survive or be torn down? And that's how the book ends. So it is a journey from the 1860s down the streets of Dover.